Welcome. My name is Jill Jonathan, and I'm with Red Wine and Blue. We are a community of women who use digital media and friend to friend organizing to change the world one suburb at a time. And today we will be talking about the Wisconsin SCOTUS election and how to prepare for 2024. So, JoJo from Jurors and Politics Girl will be joining me.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Joe. Hi,
Hi.
Lee. How are you?
Hi.
Hi, Lee. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
So
I'm
excited.
glad to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm just like we just had a live on Instagram with Motherhood for Good, which is a group working in Wisconsin for lots of things, so lots of reasons. But at this particular juncture, it is to get Janet Protasiewicz on the Supreme Court there, and it's so funny to me because Jill is in Ohio, I'm in New Jersey, and you're in California, and we
Right.
we all understand one sort of fundamental thing, which is that this race in Wisconsin matters, right?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I think the thing is that, we all kind of know it doesn't matter where in the country you are. If you're paying attention, you know American democracy straight up is under attack and it needs everyone's help. It doesn't matter what state you're in. But today, the way we can really help it is to care about Wisconsin. So you're right.
Yeah,
Yep.
and oh yeah,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
we're
Go
both
ahead,
like,
Jill.
oh, we have so many questions. But
Yeah.
Lee, I'm so glad that you are joining us. Like Joe said, we're all living in different states, but we understand the importance. And you have put together some incredible content about this race. I know
Yeah.
there's one particular video, and then I've heard you talk about it on your podcast. So could you just summarize why we all need to be paying attention to what happens next week?
Absolutely. I honestly, I can't stop talking about this race. It's so essential. And before people check out because they're like, I don't live in Wisconsin, like I don't know anything about Wisconsin. Why should I be caring about Wisconsin? Like I was just saying to Joe, if you care about democracy, if you care about the success of the American experiment, then you care about Wisconsin. You just don't, you might not know why. So on April 4th, which is next week, Wisconsin is having the most important election in the nation. And it'll really come down to how much work we put in to make sure it goes the right way. If you think of Wisconsin as the ultimate swing state, like if you look at the voting records, Wisconsin is actually a clean split, 50-50, if not Democratic leaning. But those numbers aren't reflected at all in their state politics or their state policy. And that's because of their current 4-3 far right Supreme Court. So it's the Supreme Court in Wisconsin who drew the district maps for the state. So 6 of the 8 congressional districts that we have in Congress right now from Wisconsin are Republican, despite the state itself being progressive leaning. It's the Wisconsin Supreme Court that allowed almost every and all form of voter suppression in Wisconsin. So Republicans control 65% of the Wisconsin State House, despite having at best 50% of the vote. When Roe was overturned, it was the Wisconsin Supreme Court that reinstated an abortion law from 1849, one of the most extreme in the entire country. So currently, medical students in Wisconsin actually have to leave the state to finish their OBGYN training so as to not be breaking the law. And obviously, it doesn't matter what state you're in, you know that that's ludicrous. And finally, it's the Supreme Court who will decide if Wisconsin is allowed to send electors to Washington in the 2024 election if they didn't win the popular vote. And that would potentially swing the 2024 presidential election to the Republicans, even if the Democrats win. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court has a vacancy. That's what's coming up on the 4th. So, unlike most other Supreme Court positions around the country, this isn't an appointed position, it's an elected position. And this is where we, the people who believe in democracy and fairness and the rule of law, can make a real difference. So, the candidate, as Joe was just saying in the Insta she was on, the candidate we want to be sending money to and volunteering for and talking to our friends about is Janet Protasiewicz. So Judge Protasiewicz is a former prosecutor. She's dedicated her entire career to protecting victims. She believes in, fairly drawn maps. She believes in people's right to vote. She believes the person who gets the most votes should win. Her success is also essential to protecting reproductive freedom for millions of people in Wisconsin, and she's supported right across the board from everyone from Emily's List, who has never gotten into a Supreme Court race before, to public school teachers in the state. Her opponent is a man named Dan Kelly. And he is the grossest MAGA-y guy you could meet. I mean, not only is he vehemently anti-abortion, he's against all contraception, period. He's supported by all the anti-choice groups, even the most extreme ones. Dan Kelly is a hyper-conservative partisan who was endorsed by Trump in this race because he voted to overturn the election results and hand Wisconsin's electoral votes to Trump in 2020 against the will of the Wisconsin voters. This man is so deeply in the pocket of far-right interests, he has no business on the Supreme Court. And that probably explains why MAGA PACs and far-right donors are just like dropping tens of millions of dollars into Wisconsin to get this man elected. So if you or your family happen to live in Wisconsin, who wins this seat is the choice between abortion being legal and illegal. It's the difference between your state being completely gerrymandered against the will of the voters or having free and fair elections. And if you don't live in Wisconsin, this is the choice between supporting democracy or basically letting it die. And it's the choice between having the 2024 presidential election be fair or allowing the Republicans to decide who wins no matter what the voters vote for. So it couldn't be more essential. This is such an important race. And the thing is that people don't often pay attention to spring elections, right? We get all in our heads about the November elections or about the presidential elections, but we can't ignore this one, right? The results of this one election will not just be instrumental to the fairness and the lives of the people in Wisconsin, but it's going to play such an outsized role in how our presidential elections are decided in the future. So if you've ever kind of thought about like, I really want to be helping democracy, I want to be making a difference, I want to do something active and proactive here, this is your chance because this is such an important race, and who turns out for this race will be the difference between so many things, not just in Wisconsin, but around the country. And like you said, Jill, I had the head of WisDems on my show. His name is Ben Wickler, and he knows more about this race than anybody. If you want to know more about this race, I did a podcast with him. He is absolutely brilliant. He works so hard. He truly understands his state, and he really cares about democracy. And you can listen to that anywhere you want to get your podcasts. I did it in February before the primary. But what he said was, you know, Bill Clinton used to talk about the bridge to the 21st century. And he points out that this election itself is a trapdoor to the 19th century. Like, that is how stark the difference is. It is two different centuries we'll be living in. So Wisconsin Supreme Court elections come down to literally 5,000 to 7,000 votes, period, the end. So if the progressive candidate had won in 2011, they wouldn't have had gerrymandered maps for the past 10 years. We wouldn't have so many Republicans in Congress representing Wisconsin. So, and because it's a Supreme Court election and not a big congressional election, your money and your time that you put into it will go so much further than it normally would, right? I think sometimes people feel like we don't know where our money goes, or we're just throwing money away, or why does everything cost so much money, right? But it just feels endless. But until Citizens United is overturned, this is kind of the way it is. You have to kind of fight fire with fire. And in this case, you have to fight money with money. But in a small spring election like this, your money, your time is going to go so far. And people just really need that extra nudge. So I would tell people, if you can give money, give money. If you can't give money, give time. Because an hour of calling people to remind them this election is happening could be the difference between Janet winning or Dan winning. And that is the difference between the 21st century and the 18th century, right? Like, it's just not even comparable. So go to wisdems.org, give your money, give your time, and know at the end of the day who turns out for this election is going to affect us all. And elections come down to turnout, and turnout comes down to enthusiasm. And enthusiasm, we actually have some control over, and we can do that.
Yeah, oh my God, just so many amazing points that you just made, and I'm in awe.
I know, I went in a little rant there. I'm sorry. You guys got stuck in my zone. Sorry about that.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. So, I mean, the thing is, like, it is really hard not to sound like we're just beating the drum to be dramatic, when at the same time, it's like, but you have to understand this is seriously big stuff. Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about here, in the case of Dan Kelly, for instance, isn't necessarily like crystal ball speculation stuff. Dan Kelly literally worked to, like you said, to overturn the 2020 election. He was paid $120,000 by Republicans to work on the election integrity, whatever, to advise on the fake electors. This is not like we have to sort of try and guess worst case scenario. Like, no, we know what he would do, what he'd be willing to do. And there's an op-ed by the daughter of the justice, the who's retiring, whose name I'm probably going to slaughter, but it's Roggensack. I don't know, little help there. She's the chief justice who is making this vacancy, and her daughter says that Dan Kelly is unfit to occupy her seat on the Supreme Court in this op-ed, and that's definitely a red flag. But what we know also, and you don't need a crystal ball to anticipate, is based on what they have done in years past, and in particular since the 2020 election, in terms of voter suppression in Wisconsin, has had, huge impacts already, because they did not like the way that election went. So it's huge impacts already. And we know that the trend, if Dan Kelly were to beat Janet Protasiewicz, which I love saying because I can actually say it too, we don't have to guess at what they would do to restrict, voting access further. So it's like, these aren't just us beating our chests and saying, like, this is what we think might happen. Like, he's already drawn the map, more or less, for us to be able to say, no, we can pretty clearly point to these things happening.
Yeah, no, Wisconsin is the absolute playbook for Republican authoritarianism, and we can't pretend that it's not. I mean, just so people know, Dan Kelly is a legitimate GOP operative. He was actually appointed to the Supreme Court in 2016. And as soon as he was there, he showed himself to be like just a full-blown Republican hack. He lost that election. He could have permanently stayed on the bench in 2020, and he lost. Even after he was endorsed by Trump. And that made him only the second sitting Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin's history to lose a re-election campaign. So he's out here running again, and he was garbage to begin with, and he's garbage now. He's been endorsed by Pro-Life Wisconsin, and like I said, that opposes not just abortion but contraception. He says that Justice Clarence Thomas is his hero. So as far as I'm concerned, this man just absolutely can't win. And Janet Protasiewicz is absolutely marvelous, but it really comes down to the fact that she believes in free and fair elections, right? So it obviously pro-choice is a very essential part of it, and human rights and bodily autonomy. But at the end of the day, I think you need someone who believes that voters' votes should count, because if that doesn't matter, then none of the things we believe in matter, because no one will be listening to us. So we have to make sure that that the people who believe that the votes should matter are the ones that are going to be in charge of the court.
Like, that's only a little terrifying, right?
Well, the problem is that we've let it get so far, right?
Yeah.
There's so many races in so many parts of this country, where you're like, geez, how did it get this bad? Like I feel like every single day I see something about Tennessee or something about Texas, and I think, how did they get there? Like in Oklahoma, how did they get there? And it's because for years we weren't paying attention between the big races. And these are the kind of races, this little race in April, between election years, that the Republicans have always been smarter and getting on and putting, time and energy into. And it's about time we caught up, and caught up on behalf of democracy, because we can't function like this, because they've kind of legislated us into a position where they can't be voted out, because of their gerrymandering and because of their state legislatures and because of their AGs. And these are the races we need to be paying attention to. It's why I'm very, I'm supportive, despite the fact that I understand the argument against it, that I'm supportive of just sticking with the Biden-Harris ticket for 24 and putting all of our money and attention on winning back the House, on keeping the Senate, on getting AGs, on getting governors, on getting smaller races, school boards, these kind of things that we often don't pay attention to, because we're focused on the big presidential ticket. We need everything now. We need to throw our money at everything, and we can't be wasting our time and energy on things that we don't need to be wasting our time and energy on. Need to be very, very strategic right now. And things like a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin is an absolute strategy move. And I think Democrats need to be distinctly strategic, when the alternative is authoritarianism.
Wow. Well said. And Lee, I just want to, you were saying it affects democracy, and that's why us and other states need to pay attention to it. And then people in Wisconsin, it also can affect the gerrymandering, abortion rights, but then there's other rights that the court could attack or undermine like trans rights
Oh yeah,
and
no,
different
they
things like
will.
that,
They
right?
will attack without a doubt. And look at Wisconsin, right? They have a Democratic governor. Governor Evers has been elected twice, right? And the Republican Party runs the rest of the state. And that's only because that Supreme Court has allowed them to. It's not based on the votes. The the unbelievable thing about Wisconsin is it used to be the test ground for progressive legislation. It was such a progressive state. And now it's just been gerrymandered within an inch of its life, right? And the Republican Party continually runs on this idea that government doesn't work. And then what they
Mm.
do is make sure government doesn't work, right? So they say it doesn't work, and then they throw a million wrenches in the system. It's like they're saying, oh, yeah, well, these shootings are happening because of mental health problems. And you're like, but you all just voted against adding mental health to schools, right? Like they
Mhm.
want the problems, right? So if you can't win on your ideas, you have to make sure your opponent can't win at all. And this is the kind of behavior that needs to be stopped. And we need to do that piece by piece, and it's slow and it's frustrating. And, you're like, oh my God, we're still talking about the election. Are we still talking? Is there another election I'm supposed to care about? Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. And I think what people have to kind of get in their head is that we are not running a sprint. This is not what we're doing. We are running a marathon that goes into another marathon, that goes into another marathon. And so we need to kind of keep our energy up, take breaks when we can, and then really, hot, like get into it when we need to, which is right here for April 4th, then take a little break, then get back into it, then take a little break. You know what I mean? And like just
Yeah.
know that it's just going to continue. And that's okay. We're going to
Yeah.
be okay. We can do that.
Yeah.
But anyone who believes in democracy, who imagines a country where elected politicians can actually do their job, rather than simply being blocked at every turn by obstructionists, should want to change the way a state like Wisconsin functions, right? You don't have to live in Wisconsin to be like, that's not right, right? That's
Mhm.
not right how they're doing that. And I want to do whatever I can to help the people who want to make it right. That's what we
Right.
need to be doing.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's so interesting that you were talking about, yeah, it's easy to get focused just if all of your attention on the national elections and the presidential elections and the Senate runs, et cetera, et cetera. I think I was guilty of that for a really long time. And then, I started paying attention a little bit more. And what I'm realizing now is that the attack is starting at the bottom, at the base, at the foundation of all of these systems, that from the school boards to the local elections to these, Supreme Court elections, et cetera, et cetera. And the fight is there too. And it actually, right now, if you ask me, that's where it is primarily at the moment, in between these big election years, right? Like it feels like an off year, but it's really not.
Mhm.
I didn't know this until recently. I thought I was paying really close attention, and someone brought it to my attention that a town, two towns over, one right next to where I grew up, had a school board that had gone full right wing extremist, and they were banning a book. They were banning a book about, a character who happened to be an LGBTQ youth. And I didn't even realize that was happening in my backyard. And so, like, it's interesting because, like you said, this isn't just the kind of thing that like every 2 or 4 years we can sort of like perk up and pay attention to, because in those windows of time, so much damage and dismantlement can have occurred while we weren't really paying attention, because the other side, the one doing the dismantlement, they're not sleeping on the job, right? They understand that maybe if the system or the country or the way our, electorate is changing doesn't necessarily mean it favors them winning, that they have to find other ways to do it. And they're finding other ways to do it when we're not paying attention. So, like, it doesn't mean that everybody out there has to be paying 24/7 attention to every race that there is. Like you said, Lee, sometimes somebody else is going to take up the mantle. Like in the case like Wisconsin, Lee's been paying a lot of attention. And I'm so grateful for you for doing that. Red Wine and Blue's been paying a lot of attention. But, not everybody has the time or the wherewithal to do that. So I just think like it's so incredibly important to make sure as we move into 2024 and then beyond that, these races that might not seem on paper to be relevant to somebody in New Jersey or in Ohio or California or Illinois or wherever, that we do highlight why they matter, why they are important, and what the ramifications will be if we're not paying attention.
Well, especially with groups like Red, Wine, and Blue, this is going to sound like a shameless plug, which it's not. My podcast, my newest podcast on the Politics Girl podcast, it dropped today, and it's about the weaponization of mothers against democracy. And we mostly talk about Moms for Liberty, which is, growing astronomically. And they're the ones that are doing the things like you're talking about, Joe, about banning books. And they're now saying that we can't talk about or teach our children feelings, especially feelings like empathy, because
Mhm.
empathy is a gateway to queer theory, and I'm sorry. I don't, they say we speak for children. We're here for parental rights. We're here for the kids' rights. And I think, well, I'm a mother and I speak for my own child and my own parental rights. And I want my child to learn about different types of people. I want my child to learn about history. I want my child to know what happened so he can make informed decisions in the future. And who made you in charge of all mothers? Who made you in charge of all people? And I think it's essential for groups like Red, Wine, and Blue to counter these forces like Moms for Liberty that are speaking on behalf of all mothers, particularly white mothers, and say, no, that's not what we all believe. No, that's not what we all stand for. In fact, we're going to stand up against you as you ban books and ban talking about empathy and ban talking about the African American experience and ban talking about queer theory and ban talking about LGBTQIA people in general. Like everything you take away, we will fight to put back. And I think that brings it back again to Wisconsin. They have taken so much from that state, and we have to fight to put it back. And the very first thing we can do is get Janet Protasiewicz elected, because those maps that are drawn right now that make that many Republicans in our congressional districts, in our state house, in where we need to win the House back, right in Washington, those maps can be redrawn by the new Supreme Court. And if the new Supreme Court is all of a sudden 4-3 progressive, that completely changes what happens. And that's not people that are going to gerrymander to make sure that only Democrats win. That's people who are going to say, we're going to draw some fair maps. We're going to let a computer
Yeah.
do it. And, may the best person win. That's what we should all want. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, I don't think fighting fire with fire means we play their dirty games. It means we make sure it's fair. And fair is something we can all get behind. It's easier to destroy than it is to build. It's a lot of hard work to build. And I think our side is doing a lot of building. And then we just have to make sure that we are capitalizing on putting the work behind the things that will build us a better country, not take us back to whenever it was better for certain people.
Oh, so true. And one which reflects the will of the people.
Yeah,
Truly.
the actual will of the people, even if those people don't look like everyone's idealized version of some white picket fence, white family in the 1950s.
Right. Especially as you said, and this is happening nationwide, red states, left, right, all over the map,
Mm-hmm.
where we're seeing what feels like a tug backwards in time, from women's rights to labor laws for children, to books being banned, to African American studies being removed from not being able to say the word gay or talk about your menstrual cycle. I mean, it feels like we are being pulled backwards in time. And like what Ben said, like what you said, that is happening in Wisconsin, and 10 more years of a conservative majority on that court. You think of just how much damage can be done to progress in over the course of 10 years nationally and in Wisconsin, and what it says for the rest of the country as far as, a precedent.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, you're talking about a tug back. I honestly think they're trying to force us into a time machine before
Mm-hmm.
women's rights, before gay rights, before um, civil rights, honestly, before the New Deal, before
Yeah.
workers' rights. Like they would love to take us back to a time where which rich white straight men had all the power, and you could treat women however you wanted, and you could treat minorities however you wanted, and anything that makes me uncomfortable, I don't want to hear it, I don't want it in my zone, ban it, ban it. ban it. Anything that doesn't make me feel good about myself, ban it, get rid of it. And you cannot for the life of you make it the argument that that is a country of freedom, that is a country of liberty. I mean, none of that exists. The reason we have all these progresses is because people worked really hard at them. And they're not so much gradually pulling us back. They are jamming us into a time machine, and we have to be like, I'm not going. Put your arms and legs on the outside of that freaking machine and just refuse to go, right? Refuse to have your children go, refuse to have your friends go, scream and kick and shout, And in this case, the screaming and kicking and shouting is getting pro-choice, pro-democracy Janet Protasiewicz elected by going to wisdems.org, right? And I don't work for them. They are working for us right now. They are absolutely working for democracy. And the best thing we can do, you're like, you know what? I'll send them $10 so they can knock on 3 more doors and get 3 more voters out. Whatever it is, do it, because it's these moments that will be the hinge of if they get that one arm in the door of that time machine. And we're just not going to go. We're not going to go.
Yeah. And we're not going to say, in 10, 15 years time, when someone says, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you stand up? Why didn't you speak out? Why didn't you get involved? Why didn't you send that $10? Why? I don't want to be that person who's like, you know what? I don't know, because now it's too late. I don't ever want to be. Jill doesn't want to be. I know you don't want to be. I know a lot of people listening to this don't want to be those people who in 10, 15 years time are like, God damn it, if I'd only just we have kids. We're not living in those times anymore. We're not going to live with the regret of not doing enough. We're going to do the opposite. And this where Wisconsin goes, they say often America goes, and this is our chance in Wisconsin to set a marker down, to stand up for democracy, to stand up for rights, for human rights, for fundamental rights, for reproductive rights, and for fair maps, fair elections, election integrity, true election integrity, not the gaslighting that the Republicans have been shoving down our throats. True election integrity that reflects the will of the voters. That's this is our shot right now.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I feel like it sets the right tone. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were always like, well, what can I do? What can I do? And Lee, you were actually telling us what we can do.
Yeah.
If you live in Wisconsin, vote. But if you don't live in Wisconsin, support these organizations that are working to get this election to someone who believes in fair and free elections.
Yeah. And listen, if you live in Wisconsin, don't just vote, man. Get 5 of your friends that were like, what? What's happening? Every freaking college student in Wisconsin needs to be voting. They should make it a party. Go and vote and then go for some drinks. You know what I mean? Make it a whole thing. It's a Janet Protasiewicz evening of fun. You know what I mean? Do it, because it's not just your one vote. It's you and your 3 friends' votes. If these elections for Supreme Courts come down to 5,000 votes, 7,000 votes, then go with people. Go with your crew. We need you to care, because at the end of the day, Wisconsin could be the difference between a Republican president or a Democratic president. I mean, those 10 votes could literally be it. So we want human rights. We want voting rights. We want women's rights. We want rights to bodily autonomy. But at the end of the day, even if you're someone that clues in every presidential election, the presidential election's right here, right now.
Mm-hmm. And you can vote right now. Mm-hmm. And you can vote until April 4th.
April 4th.
And bring your friends, get some beer, get some cheese.
Have some fun. Have some fun saving democracy. It doesn't have to be just such a big slog all the time with doom and gloom and oh no. This is very hopeful. And it's very hopeful no matter where you're listening in the country or whoever you can talk to. Be like, you know what? This is driving me crazy. I just saw this terrible story about yet another gun death. I want to make a difference. What can I do? This is what you can do. Mm-hmm. Today, this is what you can do. Send $10, send $1, send $100, whatever, to wisdems.org or Emily's List or any of these groups helping right now on the ground in Wisconsin.
Amen.
I can't say better. Democracy can be fun.
It can. It can. Yes. It's people powered, and most people are not horrible. You wouldn't know that listening to the news, but most people are not horrible. Most people have real faith in each other. Every single time I find something, I come across something, it's like, here are good people being good, or here are some people helping this sweet dog, or here are some children doing this thing for the old man down the street. I go, here's the thing. We've forgotten that people are good, because all we hear from are the evil, hateful people that want to tell us how awful everything is. And that is not the case. And we need to lead with hope, and we need to lead with goodness. And we can do that right now.
1000%. And we all, I think we all can say we share in common that we want to build a better future for our children than the one which we found ourselves. I think you can say that regardless of party affiliation or any politics. I think we can all agree on that. And we have way more in common than that which divides us.
Yes.
I say that all the time. I really do. Like, to your point about people, it's really true. We have more in common than we think. We don't want to see school shootings. We don't want to send our kids off to school afraid every day. We don't want a government that doesn't reflect our will. That's my son coughing in the background. You know what I mean? Like, we do have more in common than we don't at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the right-wing MAGA Republicans constantly try to divide us, because it is so much easier to control us if we think we have enemies, if we think we're fighting against something, and if we don't see our commonality. And there's so much commonality here. There's so much. We all want clean air, and we all want safe children, and we all want our vote to count, and we all want to matter and live a life of worth and value where we're not struggling all the time. And that's something everyone agrees on. It doesn't matter what party you're in. And that all starts with it being reflected in our votes. We have to say, this is what we vote for, and our vote needs to count. And right now, there's only one party that wants our vote to count, and we need to make sure that that party wins over and over and over again.
Amen to that too.
I'm like, and that's a wrap.
Thanks for having me, you guys.
Thank you. I feel like this has been like a roller coaster last half hour. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so terrified. And now I'm like, wait, no, I'm hopeful now.
Be hopeful. Be hopeful.
Yeah.
Seriously. And again, this is going to sound like please go and listen to this podcast on Moms for Liberty, because everyone on this call, you guys are the counterforce to those moms. And make sure you know what you're up against, because they are working their little tails off to make sure we go into that time machine. And we need to not do that.
Yeah, that is something we are so focused on and gearing up for, that battle for 2024 and beyond at Red, Wine, and Blue. That is on our radar. It's on the top of our list.
Good.
We know that we have the freedom to parent our children and prepare them for what the real world looks like in the 21st century, and that requires standing up to groups like Moms for Liberty, who want the exact opposite. And believe me, Jill and I can definitely reassure everybody on this, listening to this, Lee, with you at the helm with us as well. And this fight, like, this is kind of the fight of our generation. Like, this is the fight for our kids, for our futures, for our sanity, for our country. And it's as a mom, it is so important to me that I'm not going to rest as long as these groups are out there, like you said, forcing this stuff down our throats and pushing us in the opposite direction. I'm not going to rest. I know you're not going to rest. I know Jill's not going to rest. Red, Wine, and Blue is not going to rest. This is going to be the fight that defines us.
Good. Let's do that.
And I have to say, I did listen to that episode this morning.
You did.
I fully agree. It's amazing. So yes, I will back that up, please.
Amazing.
Listen to that. Wow.
I think Red, White, and Blue even had a shout out at the end. My guest was like, Red, White, and Blue is doing a great job. I was like, yes.
I know. I messaged our group. I was like, they just mentioned Red.
I know. She was great.
Like, we always appreciate that. So, Lee, thank you for joining us.
Always.
Everybody else, thank you for
Lee.
joining us and listening. Definitely follow Lee at Politics Girl, Jojo from Jers, and then us at Red, Wine, and Blue. And then Joe mentioned we did an Instagram Live earlier today with Motherhood for Good, a group in Wisconsin, and that's saved on our Instagram account, so you can go back and watch that as well. So
thank you, Lee.
Everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for caring, you guys, for listening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.